Good morning and welcome to Trialogue's July webinar. I'm Sheldon Moraes, Thought Leadership Manager at Trialogue. Thank you for joining us this morning on this cool, chilly winter morning. We host these forums on a monthly basis on the last Thursday of every month. So if you don't have the Trialogue calendar where it is marked on, do mark it on your own calendar, and we look forward to sharing and discussing with you some important topics within the CSI responsible business sustainability spaces every month. These really are rich, engaging conversations which help us ask questions, have valuable conversations, and hopefully lead to more impactful, responsible business work. So thank you very much. Today we're discussing how companies and NPOs can effectively communicate their CSI and social development programs, strategies, and initiatives. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion as we unpack how businesses and NPOs can maximize their social investment for sustainable impact. Thank you very much. I see that we are getting more people joining, so thank you for joining us this morning. We'll have those come through. I want to also say thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and making time to join us this morning from their busy schedules. And obviously, thank you to you, our audience, for joining us this morning. Our monthly webinars are 90 minutes, so that gives us more time to delve into the really important topics we deal with with each month. Oh, getting my gremlins on my tongue there. Just a few technical notes. So the session is being recorded and will be shared with all those who registered, and whether, afterwards or the week afterwards, a write-up with the full webinar. So please do, re-watch it. If there's anything that you want to go over again, feel free to share it, and we encourage you to share it with your networks. If you find anything valuable, share it with, your networks, your organizations as well. A few technical points. So our platform allows you to follow the discussion, and thank you for joining us on that today. If you're familiar with it from our conference or previous webinars, you'll know how it works. If it's the first time you're joining us, we welcome, we welcome you and glad that you're with us. You'll be able to connect with your fellow delegates, pose questions, vote in our polls, and also rate the session as well. I encourage you to use the chat box to connect with your fellow delegates. You'll see it in the bottom right-hand corner, and share your thoughts on the content. You're also encouraged to ask questions in the same chat box. If you just click the Ask a Question green button, before typing your question, it'll turn green, and then I'll be able it'll signpost it for me, and I'll be able to draw questions from the Q&A box for our panelists during the discussion section of the session of the webinar. And then please direct your question to one or more of the panelists and keep it as brief as possible as well. While it is 90 minutes, you'll see that it flies by really quickly as well. And then afterwards, there'll be a short survey that will pop up at the end of the session, so you'll be able to rate the session on the platform, and we'll also share a link. Please do take it. It's a short five-minute survey. It really does help us improve our webinars, deal with the types of topics you would find valuable, or that keeping you up at night, or you've got a particular interest in, so that we can shape these conversations to be really of value to you. And then just a reminder again, the session is being recorded, and an article and the recording will be made available to everyone who registered. If you joined us late, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're just about to kick off, just a couple of house rules, getting a couple of house rules out of the way. So this is the agenda for today. After my brief introduction, I will introduce our panelists. Each one of them will have an opening 5-minute statement to get the conversation going, and to locate them within the conversation, so you're able to understand the work that they do and how they align with today's topic. After that introduction, I'll obviously hand over to the panelists, and then we will go into following their opening statements, we'll dive into the discussion part of the webinar, and our panelists will answer questions from the Q&A box. As I'd mentioned, I'll be drawing some of your questions as well, again, just to make it really valuable and have some of those questions that are keeping you up at night answered as well. And then each panelist will give a short closing comment, something for us to leave with, a final thought that we can implement in our organizations. So we're going to put the first poll up now. It's just a quick one to get a sense of who's in the virtual room with us this morning. We'd like to know which type of organization you represent. And then this will also help myself and my panelists shape the discussion to make it as effective and tailored for you. So while you go through that, it's a quick one. Let's just start locating the scope of the discussion for today to understand sort of the landscape. So Trialogue does its annual research on CSI and nonprofits in South Africa to understand the landscape, the struggles, the trends that we see emerging from year to year. That research is currently out. If you haven't completed it as yet, I will share links to those. It really does help give us a clear picture of the state of CSI and social development in South Africa, and it also allows you to give your say. We really draw on this research and this information to shape the discussions we're having. I know a lot of you use the handbook. You've got it in your offices to shape your CSI strategies, to shape your NPO strategies as well, and the work that you do on a daily basis. So thank you for that. And if you haven't taken part, I will share those links later in the conversation. So much of this information on the slide is drawn from our latest handbook research. And I think it's quite interesting to see the trends that are emerging. So a lot of conversation and communication happening in the digital space, in a more formalized reporting. So for instance, in integrated reports, CSI reports, reports back to donors and stakeholders, and obviously company websites, internal platforms, and the like. One aspect, and we'll dive into it, and I just want to flag it just to start shaping our thinking, is that there is a lot more scope for in-person communications around CSI, NPO, and obviously the social development work that we do in our organizations. And this comes through both from our research, but also from academic studies that have been done in the last 2-3 years in various parts of either the NPO sector or the corporate sector as well, showing that on the digital front, so newsletters, websites, and the lot, social media, really strong across the board, both NPOs and companies, but really, the scope for growth coming within the one, not necessarily one-on-one, but more in-person type of communications and interaction to obviously communicate our CSI. So if we look at what the research is telling us, for more than a third of companies, CSI communications is the responsibility of corporate communications departments, often CSI departments linked to corporate communications or corporate affairs as such, or within the marketing department. And I know from working with some of our clients in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more involvement, not just working with the CSI teams, but the CSI teams in those organizations being supported by their marketing departments as well. And then if we look for about a quarter of companies, CSI communications was managed by the CSI department. So we see a number of different structures in terms of CSI, and that would obviously then filter into how communications is managed as well. Now, when it comes to budget, it's generally not coming from CSI. 78% of that budget indicated, or companies indicating that the communication budget comes from another department, or there is no separate budget. That could be a good, you could spend that in a number of ways. One being that the CSI budget really going to the work that's being done, meaning the budget comes from, as support for communication coming from somewhere else. That would be a good thing if the communications is not left out, but there is obviously the fear that no communications is supported on that front. And then when we look at the non-profits, 80% of non-profits allocated 5% or less of their budgets to communications in 2025, with more than half of those not allocating any budget to communication. Now, we know NPOs are really stretched on the financial front. So this, again, an indicator that, those budgets going towards the work that's being done. But communication is such an important support function to grow the impact of the organization, if not directly, but to support that impact that is coming through as well. As I mentioned, in terms of the channels, social media, both a common channel for both CSI and nonprofit communications, as are newsletters, websites, and the like. And then just finally, when we come to the use of sustainability reports, as we start integrated, the integrated reporting or social specific social impact reports, those start coming through, and we see those being used a lot more. So a certain degree of formalizing the type of communications that we have. And then while the use of the intranet increased from 64% to 76% year on year over the same period. So again, that communications, growing within organizations, and again, using digital tools such as the intranet. I'd now like to introduce our panelists so that we can start today's conversation. We're joined by Andra Nell from KFC Africa. She's the People, Purpose and Culture Director. We're joined by Bogosi Mochehwa, sorry, apologies for that. He's the founder and CEO at Thinkerneur. And then Gabriela Makonese, the head of social impact portfolio management at Nedbank, and Andy du Plessis, the managing director of Food Forward SA. So I'm going to go to our panelists now for their opening comments, but I do want to go back and introduce our second poll for you to vote on and give us your thoughts. These are real good ways for us also to get what some of the thoughts are and inform the discussion that we're going to be having today. So our second poll is going to come up now. How would you describe your organization's CSI communication right now? So a single choice. Just give us an indication of where your company is at the moment. Okay, great to see those coming in. Okay. Great to see those coming in. Thank you very much for all of you. If you've joined us a bit late, let me just take you through. You can ask your question, clicking on the green Ask a Question button in the bottom right-hand corner. Type your question in, and I will be able to draw from that during the conversation. So thank you very much to everyone. Okay, so those votes coming in. Thank you for that. So 47% of you, or 46%, saying social impact work and storytelling are genuinely aligned. That's good to hear. 4% saying we tell a good story, but I'm not sure if it's fully honest. So their alignment and values, and we will speak to that in our discussion section. And then we do the work, but tell the stories about it badly. I think that's one of the things will hopefully help you figure out to today and solve for. And then we don't really communicate our social impact work, which we know is one of the facets of communications or lack thereof within the CSI development sector space. So thank you very much for that. Let me go to our panelists now. Thank you very much for joining us today. Andra, let me start with you, and thank you very much for joining us, Andra Nell from KFC Africa. How does social impact fit into KFC Africa's purpose and brand, and how are KFC's social impact stories being communicated?
Jordan, thank you so much for having me this morning. And it's incredible to be talking about something that I am exceptionally passionate about. And I think I've had the great privilege of working for a brand like KFC, where it's part of our mantra. So firstly, when we look at social impact or CSI, or I mean, whatever the latest terminology and jargon is, the reality is one of our core North Star principles that we focus on is the fact that it can absolutely not be adjacent to the business. Repeatedly, and I think there's a lot of research that supports this, when you find that people are doing things that are either not ingrained into their business or their daily operations or how they're operating their day-to-day operations as a business, the reality is that it becomes an add-on and an optional element for brands. So at its core, for us, purpose and the good that we do and the impact we make in communities has to be ingrained into our business. So to that extent, it is part of how we run our business every day. It's part of how we bring our people promise to life. It is a part of how we consistently make sure that when we're designing our business, it's not just around the number of restaurants we operate and open. It's not just around the profit line, but it really is around the number of people we employ and the livelihoods that unlocks the incredible impact we get to make across our supply chain. We're incredibly proud of the fact that every time we open a new restaurant, we've got 35 more jobs created in this country, and 100 new jobs across our value chain. In addition to that, we also know that as a brand, we are because of the people in the communities we operate in. So making an impact in those communities is not just, part of, doing the right thing, but it's also really good for business because business cannot succeed in communities that fail. So continuously making sure that programs like Ad Hope and Mini Cricket are alive in every community we operate in is incredibly important for us because it allows us to ensure the sustainability of, yes, us as a brand, as a business, but also at the same time of the community we operate in and the jobs of the 40,000 people we employ. So that's really how it comes to life. And the reality is that we have got the second largest feeding program in South Africa after government running through Ad Hope. And to make sure that those kids can rely on the next meal, that it's about food security and not just addressing the hunger of today, we've partnered with our customers to make sure that we reach as many kids as possible. Now, what happens is there is a responsibility to make sure that, firstly, we do that sustainably and responsibly, but at the same time, also letting our customers know where those 2 rands go. And when we continuously look at how we do that, it becomes increasingly important to make sure that we ingrain it in our business. Because if you think of the fact that that moment where you are giving that 2 rand, that's really the opportunity to let you know the impact you're making. And an example of how we're integrating that into our business, just to state my point around how this comes to life for us, is the fact that when you go into our stores now, as of Tuesday, you will get to see those organizations where that touring goes in real time. And that for us is just a very practical example of how purpose and, a CSI gets brought to life as a way of us operating our business. Now, the last thing that I want to conclude with is that we're not doing this because it makes for a great PR story or, looks really good when we say it out loud. It's because what we've realized is this impact story and the catalyst of change and impact that's created when we ingrain impact into the way we operate our business has actually fueled our results. we cannot decouple our success as a brand from the impact that we make across our employees, our value chain, and the communities we operate in. It has made us who we are as a brand for the past 50 years, and it is setting the standard and the framework and the blueprint for how we're going to operate in Africa for the next 50 years. I'm going to leave it there for now, Sheldon, but I think that really is the ethos of how this comes to life for us.
Gremlins there on my buttons. Thank you very much for that, Andra, and it really does set up the conversation from KFC Africa perspective, really, really well. Bogosi, I want to come to you now. Bogosi Mochegwa, the founder and CEO of Think Near. Now, Bogosi, you work in a very interesting space, sort of at the intersection of social development, brand, sustainability and communications there. How can companies incorporate social impact into their brand building, and which companies do it well?
Thank you very much, Sheldon, and good morning to everyone. I feel like Andra answered part of my question. I feel like I'm always a fan of Andra and her work, and I always feel like KFC is almost like the benchmark on how to think about social impact and running a business. So I think to answer your question, for businesses, I think social impact is a non-negotiable. I think Andra spoke to that. And I think what makes me happy is that most companies get that. Example, KFC and the likes of Nedbank. I believe that in a country like South Africa, being only concerned about profits or being profit-driven only is actually irresponsible. And I think the way your question is phrased almost suggests that social impact and brand building occupy separate pockets, which are distinct and separate from each other, which is, I think is fair. And I think that's how most organizations operate. But I think then the implication is that social impact gets to be seen or viewed as a cost center. Most organizations don't see it as an investment. So part of the work that we do at Think Near Sustainable Impact is about shifting the mindset towards social impact and profitability being viewed as one. For us, it's like speaking about social impact and profitability in the same breath. So it's this idea that organizations must believe that social impact is an inevitable imperative that they need to do. I think the best way to incorporate is to firstly look at it at a strategy and vision level. If your strategy and your vision do not articulate or speak to profitability and impact in the same sentence, I think that's where the disconnect starts to happen. And doing good must be part of business practice. And I'll give you two examples, one global and one local. There's a company called Tommy Shoes. It's a very wonderful and very beautiful basic business model with social impact at its core. So they sell shoes. For every pair that is bought, another is given to a deserving individual. And it's not always somebody in the country, it could be somebody in a different country. And I think that's the best way to look at social impact and running a business. Locally, there was in one of my sessions that I hosted, there was a case study from CSI, the company. If you remember, during the looting, a lot of people were, just going into businesses and taking whatever. CSI experienced something different. What they experienced was, because of the work that they do in the community members felt that it was their responsibility to actually protect CSI. So some of the community leaders and some of the people around, they formed a human barricade to actually protect the CSI factory so that it isn't looted. What this means is that the people in the community understood the value of CSI being operational. And I think that comes from SEPI almost putting similar amount of effort they put into community building as they do in running and operating their businesses. So I think those two case studies, are case studies that we can look at and borrow some inspiration from. And I'll also leave it there for now.
Thanks very much, Bokhos. And it's quite interesting. You mentioned the SAPI example, and I think it's a I suppose that is an outcome of their strategic CSI. They were the winner of the strategic CSI award in 2024, and the focus of strategic CSI is exactly what you and Andra have been alluding to. It's about the alignment of your CSI efforts with the core purpose of or the core areas of the business, right? So that they're not these two disjointed things. And it's quite interesting. I mean, that's a fabulous example, a rich example, because one of the things that came out of SAPI's thing was the alignment to, what their business is looking to achieve from a financial and core business perspective, and their CSI and how that expanded into the communities around, SAPI's locations. So it really does bring forth that showing you what real impact can have, CSI can have if done in a very thoughtful manner that aligns to the business and is done with the necessary intention. Before I come to Gabriella, I want to launch the third poll for us to get your thoughts on that. How many staff manage social impact communications in your organization? So this is similar to a question that comes out in the research that we look at every year. And it'll be good to get your take on that and what you think about that. While you're voting on that, let me introduce Gabriella Makonese from Nedbank. Gabriella, thank you very much for joining us this morning. She's the head of the social impact portfolio in Nedbank's social impact unit. Gabriella, how does the social impact unit ensure it communicates effectively in an organization of the size of Nedbank, which has a number of business units, divisions, operates across a number of market segments and even locations? How do you communicate under one corporate umbrella?
Hi, Sheldon. Thanks for having me today. My opening line is going to sound so similar to what the other speakers said, but maybe because it's a tested truth. But for Nedbank, social impact is not sitting in some philanthropy office somewhere in a corner. It's not separate from the brand or the business at all. It's actually an important expression of our purpose and how we actually show up. Show up as a brand, show up as employees, show up to our stakeholders, and effectively and intentionally communicating this in the way that we do helps us to connect the work that is happening across the different segments, clusters, work fields, as you've put it, in the size or the magnitude of the organization that we work with across the business as a shared story of sustainable impact. And it actually boils down to an age-old truth about having a strategy and having everyone in the organization actually understand it so that we all show up in the same way. So our social impact communication starts with having real authentic impact that we actually can communicate so that all of business can actually thrive. And I mean that in the aspect of the country that we live with, not just Nedbank alone. And I think the first speaker spoke to that quite a bit. So I would think that the most important question to ask is actually not how do we communicate, but then you go back to say, what impact are we actually creating? Then you go to how then do we communicate that? But you first need to have authentic impact in the communities that we work with and working in, so that you can create credibility that you can communicate, and that must be rooted in measurable outcomes and actually having meaningful change. Internal alignment, I'll go back to that, is the foundation of the external credibility that you might want to communicate on any platform. And in an organization as large as Nedbank, as you've alluded to, consistency then actually matters in terms of the who, what, and the why. What is our big why? What are we trying to solve for? So we have connected our social impact to our business purpose. Like I said, similar to what the other speakers have actually said. So it's not separate. It's actually one thing. And if I can give an example of that to then position this differently, is that the green economy social impact strategy is then a useful example in this conversation. It, for us, demonstrates how environmental sustainability, economic inclusion, and social outcomes can reinforce one another in a very helpful way to create a viable ecosystem in which not only are we creating enterprises that we can potentially bank, but so that all of society actually thrives. And then how those commitments create opportunities, job resilience in communities, and shared value across the business. And then we increasingly communicate platforms rather than projects, if I can put it that way. So then the emphasis is on programs that can be scaled, replicated, and sustained in different contexts, in different provinces, if I can put it that way. In different parts of the business. And then our stakeholders are increasingly interested in the impact that we're having, and that is lasting beyond our funding cycle in any, I want to say, project or program that we can have. But so a simple example that I like to use is to say, we can go in a community, for example, and provide blankets, for example. That's still a really good corporate social investment thing to do, depending on what your priorities are. Or you can look at what is it that we can do within the community that we are having an interest in? How can we meaningfully create jobs, sustainable livelihoods in that community so that those individuals can get blankets for themselves? So those are the kind of conversations I think we need to look beyond. Our stakeholders are much more mature in terms of these topics, and those are the kind of things that they see value in. So for us, effective communication is about ensuring that the impact is firstly understood by us, by Nedbankers, as a key part of who we are, a deep part of our purpose, that it is trusted based on the credibility that we're able to create within the communities that we are living in, and then it's owned by the organization before it's communicated externally. I will leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gabriella, on that note. And what I like is the we're seeing certain threads emerge from our speakers thus far, and we'll obviously pull at those threads more. And thank you very much for your comments. Remember, you can ask a question; it'll flag it for me by just clicking the Ask a Question button, and then you just type in and hit submit. I will then be able to pick those up during the discussion part of our of the webinar. So thank you. Please keep those coming. And I'll be able to pick those out. And thank you. I've seen more of us have joined the webinar, so that's great to hear. If you've joined a bit late, there are 3 polls up. You can go back and vote in those. Our latest poll, which was launched: how many staff manage social impact communications in your organization? 29% saying 1 person part-time. 22% saying 1 person full-time, 27% saying managed by organization communications department, 17% saying more than 1 person, and then 2% saying external consultants, and then 5% saying none there. So keep those coming. I'd now like to introduce our 4th speaker for today, Andy du Plessis, the Managing Director of Food Forward SA, organization that does incredible work across food security in South Africa, which we do know with our poverty and inequality levels is such an important and dire need as well. So Andy, what role do marketing and communications play for Food Forward SA, and how do you recognize the companies that support your work?
Hi, Sheldon. Thanks for having us, and it's great to be part of this very exciting and interesting conversation. So for us at the organization at Food Forward SA, marketing is a crucial tool. It is an important fundraising tool, and it is also our digital ambassador. I like to rephrase it that way. Especially in the work that we do, our core focus revolves around the recovery of edible surplus food from across the food system. And when we talk to people that aren't familiar with the food system, they don't know about, when we talk about surplus food, they think, is this expired food? Is this lower grade food? And nothing can be further from the truth. So it's important that organizations allocate resources to marketing and communications. You eventually get your return. And I think this is where the difficult decision comes, especially with under-resourced nonprofit organizations, in that, if you want to get your message across to a broader audience, it is important to get at least one person dedicated to this work, and preferably a team of people, a department dedicated to this team, to this work. And then I think when nonprofits talk about marketing and PR, they think specialists. And I've heard on your poll, some people are using consultants. And I think this is where nonprofits can really start to be creative. Nonprofits that cannot afford a PR agency that charges large amounts of money on a monthly basis on retainer can be more creative by approaching an agency and saying to them, look, we don't have much to spend. We've got this amount of budget, but are you prepared to come along on a CSI side? Are you willing to consult for us just a few hours a month? And you start off small. And I think this is what's important. We cannot operate in the NPO sector without being in the digital environment, and marketing and communications is important communication around that, not only for telling people about the work that you do, but it's also showcasing the work that you do with partners. It's interesting that on your panel here, I mean, we work with KFC and we work with Nedbank. Bokhosi, I'm going to call you later and see what we can do together. But yeah, so it's important that you also showcase the work, the partnerships between the partners, and recognition is key to that. So from an NPO perspective, we have to start thinking about shared value. It's not only about the NPO and your cause. It is important to showcase the work of the partners. It's important to showcase the work of your donors. And we can do that in various creative ways. On an annual basis, Food Forward SA holds what we call a stakeholder breakfast. And all our stakeholders and partners know about that, and they have an invitation. And we share the work that we do. We thank them personally for the work that we do. We recognize some of our top donors. And then it's an opportunity to share with your audience and your supporters and your donors what you've done with their money over the past year, and what does the future look like? What does the next year or two look like? So it's integral to our work. And of course, we have to work hard at using tools like your websites, like your newsletters, your annual reports. Those are important tools to be able to get your message across. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks so much, Andy, and thank you to our panelists for those opening comments. I'd now like to ask all of the panelists to switch their cameras on and their mics on as we turn to the discussion part of the webinar. So I just want to launch our fourth poll, and as we get into the discussion, and we can have voting on that, and we can use those as indicators for our conversation. So what's the single biggest constraint on your social impact communication? We've already seen some of that come through in terms of budget or personnel, but we'd like to get your thoughts on that, because there are a number of elements that I think each of the speakers have touched on for the conversation, and we'd like to get your thoughts on that as they come through. So thank you very much. And just a reminder, thank you to those who have shared your questions already with us. Margaret, Mariska, thank you very much. Tasha, I hope I'm saying that correctly. I will pose those to our speakers on that regard. So let's just have those votes coming in. Gabrielle, let me start with you, and based on one of the questions, and I think it's from your opening comment is where it stems from. So Mariska asking, let me just, there we go. Mariska asking, hi, Gabriella. Nedbank has been known for involvement in green and sustainability CSI projects. I think that's really strong in terms of the messaging that you've driven and owning that space as well. Mariska's question is this Nedbank's main CSI focus? Would you consider education, for instance?
Hi, Marissa. Thanks for your question. Yeah, in a conversation like this, you generally don't have the liberty to divulge your entire strategy, but education is actually one of our core pillars as well under the area to trust, including sports and affinities, arts and culture, as other two key pillars that we do have. So it's not only education, but other complementary features and extensions of education. So we're not only funding education from ECD up to tertiary level, actually, but we're also very much interested in along the education journey, what is it that a child actually needs for effective development and growth, and that also includes arts and culture, it includes sports, etc. So all of that is also what we do fund. Thanks for your question.
Okay, thanks very much, Gabriella. Mariska, I hope that that helps you here. Pogosi and Andra, I want to come to you next because Bambi asks a really interesting question. So she says, from Trialogue's research across various South African companies, what's the single biggest gap you see between how companies think they are communicating their CSI impact versus how beneficiaries and the public actually perceive it? So I think she's looking at that gap between what's communicated and how that communication lands, is perceived, and comes through. Pogosi, let me start with you. What is what causes that gap, number one? And number two, how can companies think about closing that gap so that the intention of the communications equals the perception that is created?
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's a very important question, and it's one that we grapple with. So part of our work that we do at Thinking is Sustainable Impact is about how do we make, firstly, before we get to communication, but how do we make the expenditure effective? And the key stakeholder is always the beneficiary, the people that we are doing this for. So there's comms, and I think Gabriella put it beautifully when she said there's the work that needs to be done and then having something worthy to talk about. And I think the gap usually tends to happen or comes when there's an over-index on the narrative and the storytelling before the actual work is done. So I always encourage organizations, companies to actually focus and emphasize on the investment towards the beneficiaries. For example, some of the work we do is an audit of effectiveness where we look at where the most money is going. Unfortunately, you find that most money actually goes into storytelling, into narrative building, into content creation, and then a small portion of it actually gets invested into the project. And I think it should be the other way around. For me, if I were to say, how do you close the gap? I may sound maybe a bit contradictory or maybe opposing to the idea of communication. I say, I would rather spend 100% of the money invest it into where it is needed, where beneficiaries are concerned, and say nothing, versus spend a lot of time and energy and effort into PR inflation, narrative building, and telling all these beautiful stories, but the work is never done. So I think the gap happens when there's a disproportionate amount that goes into the PR side, the social media side, where we emphasize, the reach, the views, and almost neglect the main thing. And the main thing is always the beneficiaries, the people that we're doing it for. And I think fundamentally, the reason we invest is to change lives, is to transform current circumstances, and it is to move the needle. And if we ever do storytelling, the storytelling should be about the impact that we achieve, not the activity in itself.
Okay. And I want to get your perspective on that question from Bambi and sort of the gap. How does KFC think about it in terms of the communications we've put together and that we've disseminated versus, the perception from beneficiaries or people out in the market? You're such a big company. You've got obviously your beneficiaries, but then you've got your consumers who are, the general public.
So, my good friend Bukhosi said it all right. Comms has to be the cherry on the cake. It cannot be, the core focus. I think increasingly we are seeing consumers that have access to far more information, and their attention span is 6 seconds now, I'm told. It might even be less today than it was last week, is the reality. And if you are firstly telling the smoke and mirrors story before doing the work, the reality is you get called out for it very quickly. So my big challenge, and I see Andy nodding on this because we've had this conversation for the past couple of years, is it comes to what end? If it is not communications that will be further fueling and inspiring and enhancing the impact you're making, then I would really question why you're doing it, because then that goes back to super traditional, and I want to say aged PR, where you would go to a beneficial organization and hand over a check to be seen to be good, doing good, rather than actually investing into meaningful impact and, making a very real change. So for us, the big thing is also, what are we trying to achieve? If it secures the future of Ad Hope, then absolutely we should do that communication. If it increases the impact we make, then, we'll invest into that communication. If we are able to, create more jobs by telling a story around employee development as an example, and I'm not saying that CSI, I'm just talking about general impact work, then absolutely you should be doing that, because then also your consumers and your employees and your beneficiaries, I'm going to add that group there, it's far more authentic. It'll land a lot clearer, and it allows people to credibly understand what it is actually doing. I referenced the tech solution, which is a game changer for us from an Ad Hope perspective, is, how do you at scale let people know where every 2 rand is going? You and I both know the power of technology. And for the first time, we can absolutely do that for every single, opportunity that people are in the stores. So that's why communication should exist, because we know that when we partner with our consumers and they're able to feel in a very real way how they are making an impact instantly, that will help us feed so many more kids, because that additional 2 rand gets added to our donation, allows us to tell a far bigger story, and allows us to continue addressing a very real challenge.
Thanks for that, and I think it really is, good that we're thinking about how do we close that gap between comms and what people perceive on that. Andy, I want to come to you, and we've got a question. When we think of comms, we often think of external communication, but Andrea, you've touched on it. Gabriella, you touched on it as well, in terms of the internal buy-in and communications. We see it from the research, internet, and the like, but there's also to the stakeholders, who are either your investors or beneficiaries. We shouldn't forget beneficiaries and the communities that within which we work as our stakeholders, right? Who we engage. Andy, from your perspective, we've got a question. We've got a question here regarding the type of information and metrics that your partners would want in terms of to show social return on investment. So Wayne asking, what metrics are companies increasingly asking for to demonstrate social return on investment, and could this be transferable through NGOs, NPOs who do not focus on food security? So I think what Wayne's asking there is, with an organization like yourself, which is sort of at the forefront of both impact, but also the type of communications that you're doing, what sort of metrics are companies asking for? And then what can other NPOs learn from that?
Yeah. I think that's a vital point if we are going to improve relationships between corporates and the nonprofit sector. Just to give an example, we've been working with KFC and ANDRA for the past year and a half, almost 2 years now, crafting a business plan around the partnership, and we'll share more about that in the next month or so. But what we've done together with ANDRA's team and our team is we've sat down. We've tried to understand what their objectives are as a corporate citizen in this country. And we made sure we try and marry that up with the values and the work that we do as an organization. So what are some of the corporates asking for? So reporting is a key component of the work that you do. Corporates want to be able to demonstrate to their boards, to their customers, their shareholders, what kind of impact their 1% of net profit after tax is making. And so reporting is key. It's important to have the conversations around with your partners and say, right, what kind of reporting are you looking for? And how do we need to adjust our internal systems to be able to accommodate for that? But increasingly, corporates are saying, what are your metrics? Now, in our organization, if you visit our website, for example, you will see right there and there the kind of metrics we focus on. Our cost per meal, which demonstrates our efficiency, the number of people we serve, which talks about reach, the kind of values we look at when we talk about rural impact, and the kind of programs we focus on in the food security sector, mother and child nutrition, TB care focus, and others. So I think it is important to demonstrate specific work that you are doing. And the way we do it is we work with an incredible amount of universities and tertiary institutions that come to us and say, we'd love to do research on your work. In January, we just published our first for South Africa in a long time about household food insecurity and what that's like. What does the picture look like in households at this time? And that research was done together with UCT's SALDRU, or South African Labour and Development Research Unit. They did that work on our behalf. We've done work with Stellenbosch University, and we're busy with a piece of work around the social impact, social return of the work that we do, and so that we can show a real social return on investment impact on our work. So those kind of things are important. We're working with another tertiary institution called EduVas, to help us measure what the impact is of our mother and child nutrition program, focusing on children that are malnourished. We demonstrate that in our marketing materials, and we show people this is where the funds are going, and this is how your impact is demonstrated. So if anyone donates financially to our organization, there's a specific metric we give back to them and say, this is how many meals this covers, and these are the kind of programs that it will be directed towards. If someone donates food, like a farmer, commercial farmer, or a manufacturer or a retailer, we can translate that immediately into what that cost per meal is for the amount of tonnage or volume of food that you've given us. So increasingly, it is vital that NPOs show that social impact, and they must show their partners, their corporate partners, what that looks like for that corporate partner. Key.
Okay, thanks for that, Andy. And I think that's really important, Wayne, and to the other NPOs on the line. I hope that helps in terms of giving direction on how to think about comms in terms of, your stakeholders or investors, and then also, what lessons can be learned there. Let me just go to the results of the most recent poll. If you haven't voted in that, please do. But we already see some trends coming through on that one there. So the question was, what's the single biggest constraint on your social impact communication? 41% saying in-house skills or capacity. I think that goes to, a point that Andy had made. Budget and resourcing, as we've seen coming up. Often those two go hand in hand. Getting leadership buy-in, which I think is really important. And Gabriella, you touched on it a bit there, and I'll come to you and Andra on that in terms of how you get leadership buy-in. We know that executive support is really key. 5% saying fear of looking, well, just moved up to 7, fear of looking boastful or performative. Now, I know this has been an underlying, anxiety when it comes to CSI communications as well, and one that still exists as well. I think, Andra, you mentioned something which aligns to that, where companies are seen to just be writing a check or handing over school shoes and then, leaving. And we live in a rather cynical society where those things are then questioned, So I think brands then sometimes step back and say, oh, how will this be perceived? And then funding should go to causes rather than communications. And I think that, that's a point that you made, Bogosi, to say, if you had this either or choice, your first commitment is to the work that you do, that creating impact. And from that flows the good stories and examples and case studies of impact. I mean, case studies are things that we really use at Trialogue as part of our thought leadership, because it is about learning and not just positive communications. What's been learned through those programs? What takeaways are there for others? How did they, break through barriers or obstacles to arrive at success? So thank you very much for voting in our polls. You'll also see on your feed on the platform, I posted Trialogue's write-up on the SAPI Kulisa strategic CSI program and why it won Trialogue's strategic CSI award in 2023. Apologies, I said 2024. It was 2023, and that goes to the anecdote that Bogosi shared around SAPI and the communities it works in, and what they faced, I think, during the 2021 looting that we saw. Andra and Gabrielle, I want to come to you. So we talk here about leadership buying. We're talking increasingly about CSI communications, integration with the rest of the business. We do know from interacting with some of our clients or other corporates, some CSI departments saying, look, we struggle to align or break through with possibly marketing or greater corporate comms and the like. What would your advice be? And let me start with you, Andra, for CSI departments who maybe are a bit sort of left out to their own devices, or they're smaller, or finding it harder to integrate or align more closely with general business marketing and communications.
It is such a hot topic for many people, because I think in the absence of that, the work you do, it becomes optional, and it becomes a nice to have, which can feel quite disempowering for teams. And I've been a part of many organizations where it seemed adjacent to business. What we have found, and what has really strengthened it, is by very closely being able to map the connection between what you do and why that is helping the business achieve its business priorities. Now, if you are finding that hard to do as a CSI team, I would really challenge you to go back and understand your strategy, because if it's not a part of unlocking the future sustainability of the business, I would question the relevance. It doesn't mean that you're not investing into great causes. It just means that the sustainability of the programs are at risk as a result of not being ingrained into what the business authentically cares and is working towards. I'll give you an example of that. We're in the expansion and growth business. You know, yes, we do sell the world's best fried chicken, but actually what we do is it's really about growing and building as many restaurants as we can. The reason why that becomes a very easy conversation with our authority stakeholders, with property developers, etc., is because as a business, our impact is far greater than, you know, the sales we will generate, and, you know, following that, the sale of the rent people pay. So if we're able to illustrate to our local government teams our intention to and track record of employing more people, investing into communities, building, or contributing towards better infrastructure, that becomes a far better conversation. Now, it's not the reason why we do it, but it does fuel the future growth of the business. So my encouragement would be is that the CSI you do, so whether you are investing into scholarships and potentially empowering your next generation of employees, if you are, investing into, there's a lot of, really incredible work, empowering kids with coding skills that will set them up as future employees. Are you able to link that to what you are trying to achieve as a business? Are you able to then inform and, counsel your executive team on how this makes you more resilient? Because then it becomes a non-event. It becomes an absolute must for the organization. So business exists for specific purposes. All of us are in specific industries, and we sell specific things. In our case, a bucket of chicken and wings is obviously what we give to our customers. But in every business, we want to make sure that we continue to operate into the future. And if you're able to unlock that and enable that and align your CSI strategy with it, I think it becomes a lot more intuitive, obvious, and a non-negotiable when you're crafting that next company strategy.
Thanks for that, Andra. Gabriella, from your perspective, how can CSI teams, seek to influence, align with, other parts of the business, such as, marketing and comms, and even, at an executive level to get that buy-in?
Yeah. I'll use examples to drive the point home. For example, at Nedbank, we actually sit within the marketing cluster. So that's how embedded our CSI really is. And I think in the beginning, I spoke about how this is a core part of our purpose. And it's intentionally that way. Andy, earlier, I was actually taking down some notes, but he actually spoke about corporate citizenship, which is something we haven't spoken about on this platform today. But for example, Nedbank has, I think since the beginning of this year alone, 9,000 Nedbankers have volunteered in different initiatives of their own time, offering their own skills in the programs that we have. And that's how embedded it is. I would actually say that we might actually have another problem, which is that Nedbankers are quite happy to go and do their own thing. And that's essentially because we understand the business of doing good, not necessarily for Andy touched earlier on in terms of what the obvious tax benefits are, but how do you use your money before you get there to actually do good in society so that all of business can thrive, including Nedbank? And how do you meaningfully establish enterprises or strengthen communities in such a way that becomes a reality? And yeah, I touched on the point of how to do good. So this is not, I think from a perspective of, or he also spoke about social return on investment, which is actually one of the things I think we have actually honed on quite well in terms of how do we measure the value of the work that we're doing in communities in terms of monetary terms. If you were to quantify the impact that you have, what does that look like in monetary terms? To basically explain the work that Andy was alluding to in relation to the work done with Stellenbosch. And I think that brings the perspective into reality, mainly when communicating, as you said, with leadership, with executives, to say, this is not just a program, for example, but this is what it leads to in terms of impact. This is the value that it unlocks for the community. This is the value that it unlocks back to us as we exist in thriving communities. But to have a leadership that is sold in terms of what your purpose is, how you go about doing that, so that an organization as Nedbank, which has like 22,000, 23,000 people, we all show up with an intention to do good, in whether you being serviced at a local branch, or you being serviced at our branch here in Sandton, or someone is speaking to you related to a project, or you speaking to somebody in comms or CIB. We all need to have the same messaging and being driven by the same purpose, which is to do good within the communities that we work in. But I think the work of the how needs not only external systems change, but internal systems change. For example, I gave an example of how we are structured intentionally placed within Nedbank, and it's deliberately so that purpose, or the story of our purpose and the impact that we're having in the communities, just naturally flows through in the work that we do.
And you touch on that large number of employees, and I mean that's an asset, when it comes to corporate purpose, corporate citizenship as well. I want to come back to you, Gabriella and Andra, in terms of using CSI, or using communications effectively internally to get alignment and buy-in to the purpose. I mean, Andra, you've even got it in your title as well. So I want to come back to that. But Andy Bogosi, I want to come to you because and also just the time check, we're at just after 25 to 11. I told you the 90 minutes would go really quickly. So we've got about 25 minutes left. But Andy and Bogosi, I want to come to you based on a question from Jackie Renz. So she says, communication is only effective if it reaches the right audience. How can NPOs ensure their message reaches the people who are most likely to support or invest? With so many communications channels available, how do they get their stories in front of the right people and decision makers? And I think, Jackie touches on two really important points. It's how can they think about, so in the practical designing of communication strategies, plans, flows, how should they be thinking about, okay, where do we reach the right people? Where do we use the limited time resources that we have to put our communications in front of them? And with so many available, how do they work around that, especially at a time when there's so much information flowing across our desks every single day, and for them to obviously be impactful there. So Bogosi, let me come to you first. What would your advice be to Jackie?
Thank you very much for that question. I think I'll tap into my strategy discipline. So, in strategy, I always say there's this idea. So obviously when you do strategy, or when you're trying to do something, it's always about articulating what it is that you want, knowing what you want. But I think the flip side of that coin is also knowing what is it that you do not want, what is it that you shouldn't do. So that clarity is important. And most times we are always bombarded or encouraged to do everything. But I think what is important is having clarity. I think firstly starts with intention. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? Being clear on your intention and being clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve actually simplifies your focus. If you want to do something that's good for the community or for people. I would say the beneficiaries are your first stakeholders. And then you can build a stakeholder segmentation around the people that you are doing this thing for. So I think it's always important to have a segmentation that prioritizes your stakeholders. But I think it's also important to know why you want certain people to know what you want them to know. Generally, for a bigger organization that has bigger budgets, they can spray and pray and, try to reach everybody. But I think for smaller organizations, I think being clear and doing what you can is important, and being focused, knowing your primary audiences, knowing your primary stakeholder grouping, knowing who you need to reach and why, and what it is that you want to achieve by engaging with the stakeholder. Sometimes we get, confused, or we get overwhelmed by trying to reach every stakeholder all the time, every single day. I think being clear about your intention, why you're doing it, and what it is that you want to achieve becomes very, 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 very important, so that you're not doing everything all the time and trying to reach every single person. And it's not a bad thing. But I think in the world of digital comms, we're always encouraged to almost be on every social media platform. We are everywhere. We are on websites, we are emailers, we do all of these things. But focus and clarity and consistency with your grouping of stakeholder segment, I think might help you. And I always say that this is a very long game. If you are consistent and you consistently speak to your audience, it will snowball. You will build advocates that will come with you along the journey. It's always the long game. So be patient also with yourself. I think I'll leave it there for now.
No, thank you very much for that, Bogosin, and for those insights as well. And Jackie, I hope that helps. Andy, from your perspective, what would your advice to her be?
Yeah, I think this is one that a lot of nonprofits struggle with, even well-resourced nonprofits, with healthy budgets and hundreds of thousands of rands. You can't reach everyone all the time, and I think that's important to grasp firstly. So I think the way to do it is, and Bogosi's hit the nail on the head. It's important that you are clear about what it is that you do as an organization. You need to know internally, what is it that you do, how do you do that, and then what are the typical audiences that could be reached, and then look at your market segmentation and do that kind of research, and then start small. We see a lot of nonprofit organizations, they're opening up a LinkedIn account and a Facebook account and an Insta account and a this and a that. There's no need to open all of those kind of things if you're not able to service them well. Start with one, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook, whichever works for you and your audience and the kind of work you're trying to communicate. Start there, do that well, and things will start to progressively broaden for you. So yeah, Bogosi hit the nail on the head there, that oftentimes you don't need large amounts of money. You just need focused attention. You need to start small. And again, Bogosi is right. This is a long game, This is a long game. Not everybody is going to learn about the work that you do. I'm sure Andre's got a very healthy marketing budget in their department, but they don't reach everyone with the money that they have. So start small, do well at what you do in one area, and then work from there. What's also really good to get involved in is join networks of like-minded people and organizations. So we belong to a whole host of them, like the Weaver Network, for example, where CEOs and COOs come together and we talk about those kind of things and we get ideas from them. So join networks and learn what others are doing in this space. Start small, do that well, and work from there.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Andy. And Jackie, I hope that is helpful to you and all of the other NPOs on the webinar as well. I've also shared a link to, I think, a tool which would be, if we're looking at practical lessons, tools coming out of today, Canva, which is much used platform for creative design and the like. Offers a service for nonprofits, which is free. They've often got some educational sessions, such as webinars and the like, aligned to that to help you use the platform. So if you are starved, it can help. It can help, in terms of that communication. If you're not a designer such as myself, you can get inspiration from that. And these are tools that you can use that are freely available there for you to use. One other thing would be to also look for communications templates, such as which just helps shape your thinking around what is the message? Who is it aimed at? Why are we communicating it? When is the best time to communicate? What sort of communication are we doing? Are we, is it community radio? Is it community hall sessions? Is it social media? Is it intranet? It just helps shape your thinking to give it more focus because, and as both Andy and Bogosi have said, you can't do everything. And, it can feel overwhelming even to the most resourced departments as well. Gabrielle and Andrew, I want to come to you now from a corporate perspective. Both Nedbank and KFC have a large reach and footprint in terms of your internal stakeholders, so the size of the organizations, but also in terms of your external, your consumers and your clients as well. A bit of a two-part question. How do you get your internal stakeholders, your staff, to come along the journey of your purpose, your social impact, to lend either their skills, their time, or even if it's not, or for them to do good in society, which I think both of you have touched on. How do you bring them along? Because we do know in today's day and age, a lot of employees look for organizations that they can align with. We know from research that good social impact entrenches employee satisfaction, employee engagement, pride in the organization as well, and the spillovers of that into productivity. So how do you bring your internal stakeholders along, as well as consumers who are also more expectant of the brands that they interact with, in terms of the corporation's impact in society? Gabriella, let me start with you, and let's start with the internal influence, alignment, and bringing people along with you.
I really had to restrain myself from laughing when the comment was made about spray and pray, because and then I was texting my colleague that this came up again in the Trialogue platform that I'm in. But yeah, we also very mindful of spraying and praying, as it was put. So going back to the conversation of having a focus, your why, what is your North Star? And also, in as much as we have external comms, you should also focus on internal comms. How do you socialize your own employees, your own organization in terms of what it is that you're doing? In fact, you should probably be doing that more than you do the external, because the people who are client facing need to understand that very well, because those are your hands, your arms, your ears, and your eyes. And additionally, they're the ones that will then give you feedback in terms of this is working and this is not working. So we meaningfully provide opportunities to serve. As I've said, we have a lot of net bankers who do good in communities by themselves. So how do you then ensure that those activities or similar offerings are internal? So you need to make sure that they know, for example, that we do have educational things that you can get involved in. We provide then the platforms or the opportunities beyond what I can say Mandela Day, because it's most topical. But beyond that, how do you then have create opportunities within their work close to where they work, so at a branch or at their office, in a way that still enables them to be effective in the work that they're doing, but allows them to serve within the organization. And this starts from the onboarding process. So part of onboarding is this is our staff volunteerism journey or corporate citizenship. We actually also have a payroll giving, which means Nedbankers actually give that part of their own salary, and we obviously then match that into some of the projects, organizations that we work with. So that's how deeply entrenched it is. It's not only about serving, but people actually feel compelled because of the meaningful work that is being done and the impact that they're seeing. We also have some that have been beneficiaries of those platforms. So I think it goes beyond having programs that serve not only society, but how do are the people that work in your organizations convinced that you are legit, the work that you're doing is really authentic, and have they bought into your purpose? I think that number in terms of how many people when how is probably the true the truth teller in terms of do the people that work in your organization actually see the value, and are they getting involved, or are they keen to get involved in the work, and to what extent are they getting involved? And every year we've actually seen that number go up and up. Thanks.
When it comes to, and just to stay with you, Gabriella, on the second part of the question, I mean, obviously Nedbank has a very strong green focus, and I think it's well entrenched as part of the brand perception. We've done some work with Nedbank Private Wealth in terms of giving of clients and the like. How do you bring clients along to do good or to influence good, even if it's not on a particular project, but for them to think about doing good?
I want to say a huge number, or if not half of our projects that we work on are actually from our client base. So either they would walk in and ask for, how can I work with Nedbank? So before we even approach an organization to say we'd like to work, it's actually more the other way around. It's our clients coming in either through a banker or somebody else in the bank and saying, this is what my organization is about, and I've seen what work you're doing, and I'd like to work with you. That's one. Two is from the community perspective. I mean, we are not necessarily into and it's intentionally that way. So we would not brand where we've done good in a community, but we rely very much on word of mouth. In terms of the impact that we've had in communities, we invest quite heavily in terms of ecosystem enablement. We support a lot of work in terms of how do we capacitate the social enterprise to do the good work that they're doing beyond Nedbank project. So it's not only about the beneficiary, but how do we enable the partner that we work with to have good resourcing, to be able to tell the story, to provide the budget, for example, that you mentioned about the good work that they're doing, but do not have the budget to tell the story about. We've got net bankers who come in and help a social enterprise really expand and grow in terms of its offering, and as well as the entrepreneurs that we work with would get them into our supply chain, etc. I mean, if you're tackling a whole system, you really need to, I think, have a very focused strategy, which we do in terms of green, but I've also explained how it goes beyond green. It's in education, arts and culture, etc. But also when we have events at Nedbank, for example, we have our own arts and we have people that we bring in from the arts and culture sectors that come in and support in the young people that are doing amazing work. So it needs to be embedded quite intentionally in terms of your how, but also your why. So instead of having a dancer come in from another country who will do an amazing work, why not support the local community of dancers that we have funded on our projects and give them sustainable work that they know that they can always come in and do what they love on a Nedbank platform.
Okay.
So I think it's more of a system kind of approach that we go for. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much on that. Andra, to come to you quickly, how does KFC work around building internal alignment, and then obviously bringing your clients along, or your consumers along, with obviously an initiative such as Ad Hope, but that's not the only one, but that's, obviously quite a successful benchmark in the South African society.
So Sheldon, part of what we offer and what we really believe is a distinctive feature for us as employees, our people promise. I mean, it's really rooted on three pillars. The first one is be your best self. The second one is make a difference, and the last one is have fun. And if from the outset, what we promise our people when you work at KFC is you will get to make a difference. So it is not an add-on, it's part of what they get when they sign up, right? And they join our KFC family. So I think that's the first component. Practically how that comes to life is, making sure, we can get so proud of the impact we're making in the social purpose team if we're not democratizing that knowledge and letting people know how their contribution is making a difference and contributing towards the impact that we are making. That will obviously be a really missed opportunity. So it is deeply entrenched into all of our company events, all of our communications, etc. And then I think the last one practically is every function in our organization has the opportunity to adopt their very own Ad Hope beneficiary organization. So it's theirs. They get to pick them. They get to visit them twice a year. They get to run projects for them, do a winter drive, run fundraisers if that organization needs something specific over and above the funding that we give for food. So I think that's practically how we get people involved. And then I think it's also around leveraging people's subject matter expertise for the good of the program. So because KFC has a vast supply chain, as an example, we have the opportunity of leveraging a lot of our supply chain skills in the building, and Andy has met with them quite a few times, just to make the work that we do more efficient and effective. And in turn, these employees feel that like they're a very real part of the solution and the impact and the difference we get to make. In addition to that, part of our customer base that I'll share outside of, the people that, obviously support our business every day is our network of supplier partners. So we have got a lot of people that are also in the food business like we are, or adjacent as an example. And we've got incredible partnerships with the likes of Nature's Garden, who are now very intentionally and directly donating into the Food Forward program as an example. And that then in turn gets translated to Ad Hope beneficiaries. So we've got multiple suppliers that are either making a cash donation or contributing in a way that, matches their business provision. So that is incredibly important. When it comes to a customer perspective, firstly, we know that we want to make doing good easy for our customers. So when you hear the hunger stats in the country, you kind of want to, put your hands in your hair and go like, how do we start solving this? But what we've realized through Ad Hope, it's really this very real spirit of Ubuntu, of everybody doing their part and what they can do to make a very real and big difference. So that is how we bring our customers along on the journey, is by letting them, every time that they visit our stores, make a seemingly small donation that actually every R2 buys a meal, because it gets added to KFC's donation, and because we partner with really efficient organizations like Food Forward that allow us to make this difference. So I think it becomes really easy when it's kind of how you do business, to be honest.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Andra, and thank you to my panelists. As I said, the 90 minutes flies by. We've reached the final leg of the webinar, and I want to just call on my panelists to give us a short 30-second final closing comment. Bogosi, I've got a slightly different one for you because we haven't been able to bring in your sustainability can work, but I want to touch on that. Andy, let me start with you. What would be your one piece of advice for NPOs to leave with?
I think if there was one thing to leave with the audience is that it's important that NPOs understand that businesses and corporates have a very specific set of objectives in terms of what they do. And when they try to align that with the work of the nonprofit organization, it's important for the NPO to understand how do we create that shared value for them? How do we create the space for employees to be participants in the work that they do? And how do we demonstrate impact for that organization in the communities in which those business activities take place? I think that's number one thing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Gabriella, what would you want to leave corporates who may be, struggling with their CSI communications?
I'll make it short. I would say they should focus on authentic stories and that are backed by credible data. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Andra, what would your one piece of advice be?
I think the biggest thing is to leverage your partners. Often third-party credibility and storytelling lands a lot more effectively than you telling your own story. So make sure you're partnering with organizations that naturally have that skill and ability to bring the impact to life. And that also give you that authentic, very real impact story around it. And also just build it into everything you do, right? Like don't make it an add-on. The moment it's an add-on, it becomes another stream of work that somebody needs to take care of. And then you need resources, you need budget for it. So just make it part of all of your company events, all of your newsletters that exist already.
Okay, awesome. Bokhosi, thank you very much for that, Andra. And Bokhosi, with your final word, I mean, obviously, you're a CAN, prestigious CAN judge on the sustainability category. I've just posted the Strategic CSI Award, which we referenced with the SAPI one, but for corporates who are doing good work, the type of work we've spoken about today, where your CSI is aligned to this, to the core functions and core objectives of the business. How important is that type of recognition, when we're talking about the work that corporates are doing, Bokhosi?
Thank you very much. You're referring to recognition at CAN?
Yeah, like in the form of CAN, in the form of, strategic CSI, because it is another form of communicating as well.
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I think the most important thing is that I think award shows shouldn't award beautiful storytelling. And I always make this distinction. There's a difference between putting together an awards case study. Sometimes you find that a lot of effort goes into telling of the story about the work, and there's little innovation and creativity in actually solving problems. So I think what is important, particularly in our category, sustainable development goals, it wasn't about beautiful storytelling. Sometimes you find a case study, that case study wasn't put well together. Like you can tell it didn't have the budget, but the solution, the transformation, the change and the impact is there. So I think what is important is what I've always believed, I think for the last year or so, is that we actually don't need more awareness. I think we all know the problems, we all know the challenges. What we need is actually innovative solutions. And if we ever communicate, I think communication should be centered around the innovation and how we're solving problems. And then the comms forms part of the inspiration to inspire other organizations, other stakeholders, other people to get on the same path of innovation. I think, yes, we deal with very serious issues, hunger, GBV, but I think this is one area where we need a lot of creativity and innovation. And I think there can still be, Andra mentions the idea of having fun. I think this type of work that we do requires that type of approach. Yes, it's serious issues, but and I think in CAN, it was about celebrating the power of creativity. And in our category, the work that won was work that covers a number of critical boxes. One, solving a real issue, not exaggerating about certain things. And then secondly, delivering on the problem, solving the problem. case studies that won were case studies that actually delivered on what they had put forward as an issue. It wasn't about PR, social media likes, view likes, it was about the problem being solved. And then lastly, I think it's about building systems that are sustainable. I think, sometimes you find a brand investing in one project for 10 years. For me, that is a signal of something fundamentally wrong. I think if we invest for 3 to 4 years, build a sustainable system, let the project run on its own, and then corporations like Nedbank and KFC can then move on to other areas that need help.
Very, very important there in terms of how we think about our philanthropy and social impact work and investment. I want to thank you to my speakers, Bogosi Mochegwa, the founder and CEO of Thinkerneur, Andra Nel, People, Purpose and Culture Director at KFC Africa, Gabriela Makonese, the Head of Social Impact Portfolio Management at Nedbank in the Social Impact Unit, and Andy Du Plessis, the Managing Director of Food Forward SA. I want to thank you very much all for your time. We've gone slightly over, but thank you to our audience for staying with us. I think it's been a really insightful conversation. It feels like there needs to be a part 2 at some stage, a lot more for us to tackle, but really insightful, really valuable. And I want to thank you for you, our audience, for joining us today. Please look out for comms on our next webinar next month. You'll also be receiving a write-up and a full recording of this month's webinar. Please do share it with your networks, those in your organizations, anyone you think would find it helpful, and we'll include some of those resources that we posted there. And then just a final word, we've got our session rating up. If you can just rate it out of 5 stars, it's really good indicator for us. And then also just a quick survey that you can take after this that helps us really make these valuable for you. I want to thank you for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.